I remember the sound of the courtroom before I remember anything else. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet in a way that pressed against my chest like the air itself was waiting for me to mess up. Every footstep echoed, every cough felt too sharp. Even the shuffle of papers sounded like judgment. I was 12 years old, standing behind a wooden rail that came up just below my chest, my hands resting on top of it because I didn't know where else to put them. My palms were damp. I kept wiping them against my pants when I thought no one was looking. But everyone was looking. The courtroom smelled like old paper, polished wood, and something faintly metallic. The benches were filled, people I didn't know, people who didn't know me, all staring as if my life were a story they'd already decided the ending to. I was the only black kid in the room. My mother sat behind me, hands folded tight in her lap, her face calm in the way parents get when they're holding themselves together for their child. I could feel her eyes on my back, steady, protective, even when the rest of the room felt like it was leaning forward, waiting for me to crack. At the front sat the judge. He was white, older, his robe draped loosely as he leaned back in his chair like this was an inconvenience rather than a courtroom. One arm rested on the armrest. The other held a pen he tapped lazily against a yellow legal pad. He didn't look at me like a child, he looked at me like a problem. So, he said, his voice carrying easily across the room, you're telling us that all of this, he waved a hand vaguely, happened exactly as you described. I swallowed. Yes, sir. A few people shifted in their seats. I heard a soft scoff from somewhere behind me. The judge tilted his head, studying me like I was a math problem he already knew the answer to. And you expect this court to believe that? I glanced toward the defense table. The man sitting there, clean suit, smooth smile, didn't look at me at all. He stared straight ahead, confident, relaxed, like none of this mattered. I felt small, smaller than I'd felt all week, smaller than I'd felt when the police lights flashed behind us that night. I took a breath. My chest felt tight, but I forced the words out anyway. I'm just telling what happened. That's when the judge laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel in the obvious way people expect cruelty to sound. It was worse. It was amused. A soft chuckle escaped him as he leaned back further in his chair, shaking his head slightly. Son, he said, still smiling, do you have any idea how unlikely your story sounds? Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Not everyone, but enough. My ears burned. My face felt hot. I stared straight ahead, focusing on a crack in the wood paneling behind the judge so I wouldn't have to see the expressions around me. I wasn't wrong. I knew what I saw. I knew what happened. But in that moment, it didn't matter because I wasn't supposed to be right. The prosecutor cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Your Honor, the judge waved him off. I'm just trying to understand, he said, still smiling. Then he looked back at me. You're a young man. Young men sometimes get confused. Sometimes imaginations run wild. More quiet laughter, my fingers curled into fists. I wanted to say something. I wanted to shout that I wasn't confused, that I remembered every second of that night because it had replayed in my head over and over until sleep felt impossible. But my voice stayed small. No, sir, I said, I'm not confused. The judge raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Yes, sir. He leaned forward now, resting his elbows on the desk. The smile faded just a little. Then explain to me how a boy like you managed to notice all these details under stress. A boy like you, I felt the words settle into my chest like a weight. I pay attention, I said quietly. That made him laugh again, this time louder. The sound bounced off the walls and it felt like it hit me square in the face. My mother shifted behind me. I heard her inhale sharply, then force herself to breathe out. The judge shook his head. This court deals in facts, he said, not feelings, not stories. I looked up at him then, really looked, and that's when I realized something terrifying. He had already decided. Everything I said from this point on didn't matter, not because it wasn't true, but because of who it was coming from. The bailiff shifted near the door. The defense attorney scribbled something on his notepad. The prosecutor looked down, jaw tight. I stood there, 12 years old, alone at the center of a room full of power, being laughed at for telling the truth. But what none of them knew, what no one in that courtroom knew yet, was that the truth didn't end with my words. It was waiting right behind them on a screen that hadn't been turned on yet, and when it did, the laughter would stop. The judge's laughter faded, but the damage didn't. It stayed in the air, clinging to the walls, settling into my chest like something heavy and permanent. I stood there, hands clenched so tight my nails dug into my skin, trying to remember how to breathe without shaking. Let's continue, the judge said, already bored. He leaned back again, crossing one leg over the other. Tell the court exactly what you claim you saw. Claim. I swallowed and began again, slower this time, careful. Every word felt like it might be used against me. It was after dark, I said. The parking lot lights were on. I was waiting by the car while my mom went inside. The defense attorney finally looked at me. His smile was thin, almost polite. Like he was watching a child recite lines in a school play. And you expect us to believe, the judge interrupted, that from that distance under stress you could clearly identify what happened. Yes, sir. How far away were you? I hesitated, trying to picture it. Maybe 20 feet, the judge scoffed. 20 feet in the dark while you were scared. Yes, sir. More whispers. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. The judge tapped his pen against the desk. Do you normally pay such close attention to details? Yes, sir. And why is that? He asked. I didn't answer right away because the truth wasn't neat, because it wouldn't sound right to people who'd never lived it. Because, I said finally, I've learned I have to. That earned another round of quiet laughter, not cruel enough to call out, not kind enough to ignore. The judge smiled like he'd proven something. Interesting. He glanced toward the defense table. Counsel, do you have questions? The defense attorney stood smoothly, buttoning his jacket as he approached. He didn't rush, he didn't look angry, he looked comfortable like the room belonged to him. Son, he said, stopping a few feet away from me, you understand the importance of telling the truth in a courtroom, don't you? Yes, sir. And you understand that exaggerating or misremembering events can have serious consequences. Yes, sir, he nodded thoughtfully. Good, now tell me, were you scared that night? Yes, very scared. Yes, so scared that your heart was racing. Yes, so scared that your hands were shaking. I glanced down, they were shaking now. Yes, he smiled gently, and you expect this court to believe that in that condition you could see clearly, remember clearly, and recount everything perfectly. I'm not saying perfectly, I said. I'm saying I remember. He leaned closer. Or is it possible, he said softly, that you filled in the gaps with what you thought happened? No, sir. He straightened and turned to the judge. Your Honor, this is a frightened child doing his best to make sense of a confusing situation. A child. I opened my mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand. That will be enough, he said. The point is clear. Clear to him, not to me, not to my mother, not to the truth. The defense attorney returned to his seat, satisfied. The judge scribbled something on his pad, then looked back up at me. You may step down, he said, just like that, no acknowledgement. No consideration, no recognition of how hard it had been to stand there and speak. I stepped back from the rail, my legs weak, my chest tight. As I walked past the benches, I felt eyes on me, some curious, some doubtful, some already dismissing me as a kid who tried and failed. I sat next to my mother. She didn't say anything. She just reached for my hand and squeezed it once, hard, like she was holding me together. The judge called for a brief recess. People stood, stretching, whispering. Conversations buzzed through the room like nothing important had just happened. Like I hadn't just been laughed at for telling the truth. That's when I noticed the screens, two large monitors mounted high on the wall behind the witness stand. I'd seen them when we walked in, but I hadn't thought much about them. They were dark, blank, easy to ignore. Now a technician stood near the wall, quietly checking cables. Another man leaned over, speaking in a low voice to the prosecutor. The prosecutor nodded once. Slow, deliberate, my heart skipped. I leaned toward my mother. What's happening? She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on the screens. Just wait, she whispered. The judge returned to his seat, still relaxed, still confident. Let's proceed, he said. Next witness. But the room felt different now. The laughter was gone. The whispers had quieted. People were watching the screens. Even the judge glanced back once, distracted, then frowned slightly before refocusing on the bench. He didn't know yet. None of them did, but the truth wasn't going to need my words much longer. It was about to speak for itself. And when it did, no one in that courtroom would be laughing. The next witness was called, but no one was really listening, not like before. The air in the courtroom had changed, thickened, as if everyone sensed something waiting just beneath the surface. I sat beside my mother, my hand still in hers, my pulse loud in my ears. Every time I glanced at the screens, my stomach twisted. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "before we proceed further, the state would like to submit additional evidence." The judge sighed, already irritated. "We're in the middle of testimony." "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, unflinching. "This evidence directly relates to the credibility of the witness who just testified." That got his attention. He leaned forward slightly. "What kind of evidence?" The prosecutor paused, just long enough for the room to feel it. "Video evidence." A murmur rippled through the benches. The defense attorney stiffened. His smile vanished. The judge frowned. "Video from where?" "From the parking lot," she said. "From the security cameras." My breath caught. The judge leaned back again, but this time his confidence felt forced. "And this footage clearly shows what exactly," the prosecutor turned, gesturing toward the screens. "It shows what actually happened." Silence. The technician moved quickly now, fingers flying across the control panel. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly, unplanned but effective, pulling everyone's attention forward. The judge raised a hand. "Before we do this, I want to remind the court." The screen flickered to life. Grainy footage filled the room, black and white, timestamp glowing in the corner. The judge stopped talking. It was the parking lot. I recognized it instantly. The angle, the light poles, the row of cars where I'd been standing. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. The video played. There I was, smaller than I remembered, standing near the car, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, waiting. The room was silent now, no whispers, no coughs. The footage continued. A figure entered the frame, the man, even in black and white, there was no mistaking him. He moved fast, aggressive, purposeful. The camera caught everything. The moment he approached, the way he raised his arm, the sudden violence, gasps filled the courtroom. My mother's grip on my hand tight. The video didn't rush, it didn't skip. It didn't blur at the important parts. It showed exactly what I'd said, exactly. The judge leaned forward slowly, like his body had decided before his mind caught up. The defense attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, sit down," the judge snapped. The footage continued. The attacker fled, then another angle, a second camera, clearer, closer. My heart pounded as the video zoomed in, the image sharpening. The man's face was visible, no doubt, no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." The judge didn't laugh, he didn't scoff, he didn't interrupt. He just stared. The video ended, the screens went dark. The silence afterward was heavier than anything that had come before. It pressed against my ears, my chest, my throat. The prosecutor spoke softly. "The footage confirms the witness's testimony in full." The judge swallowed. For the first time since I'd entered that courtroom, he looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. "Defense." The defense attorney's voice was tight. "We request time to review the footage." "You've reviewed it," the judge said sharply. "We all just did." The attorney hesitated. He had nothing left to smile about. The judge shifted in his seat, straightening his robe like it could restore the authority he'd let slip. He glanced toward me, really looked at me this time, not as a child, not as a nuisance, not as someone to be dismissed, but as a witness who had told the truth when no one wanted to hear it. His jaw tightened. "We will take a recess," he said. "Court will reconvene in 15 minutes. The gavel struck hard. People stood slowly, stunned. Conversations erupted, urgent, hushed, shocked. Heads turned toward me, not curious now, respectful, ashamed. My mother pulled me into her side, her arm wrapping around my shoulders. "You did it," she whispered. "You told the truth." I shook my head. "I already did that." She looked at the dark screens. "And now they can't ignore it." Across the room, the judge remained seated, staring down at the bench like it had betrayed him. The laughter from earlier felt impossible now, like something from another lifetime. I realized then that the hardest part hadn't been speaking. It had been surviving long enough for the truth to catch up, and it finally had. When the judge returned, he wasn't the same man who had laughed. Something in his posture had changed. The casual lean was gone. His shoulders were squared, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding the gallery as if he already knew where judgment was coming from. Everyone noticed. The room settled into silence before the gavel even struck. "We're back on the record," he said. His voice was lower now, controlled. "Before we proceed, the court will address the video evidence." The prosecutor stood calmly. She didn't rush. She didn't smile. She let the truth stand where it already was. "The footage corroborates the witness's testimony without contradiction," she said. "It confirms distance, lighting, identity, and sequence of events." The judge nodded once. Slowly, the defense attorney shifted in his seat. "Your Honor," he began, "while the footage is compelling, we maintain that—" "No," the judge said sharply. The word echoed. The attorney froze. The judge leaned forward, hands pressed flat against the bench. "The court will not entertain arguments that ignore clear evidence." Every head turned. The judge swallowed. I watched his throat move. It was the smallest thing, but it told me everything. He was aware now, aware of how wrong he had been, aware that everyone had seen it. He cleared his throat again. "I want to address something else before we continue." The room held its breath. "Earlier," he said carefully, "I made remarks that were inappropriate." My heart started pounding. He looked straight ahead, not at me, not yet. My response to the witness's testimony did not reflect the standards of this court. Whispers erupted, quickly silenced by a glance from the bailiff. The judge's voice wavered just slightly. "This court relies on impartiality, on fairness, and today I failed to uphold that." The words landed heavy. I felt my mother's hand tighten around mine. Then the judge turned. His eyes met mine, and he stood. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor was loud in the silence. He faced me fully now. "Son," he said, his voice no longer distant, no longer superior, just human. "You told the truth." My chest burned. "I laughed," he continued, "when I should have listened, and for that I apologize." A collective inhale swept through the courtroom. "I apologize to you," he said, "and to this court." I didn't know what to do with that moment. It felt too big, too late, too necessary. I nodded because it was all I could manage. The judge sat back down, but the authority he'd worn earlier never returned to him the same way. The trial continued, but everything moved differently now. Questions were sharper, objections fewer. The defense no longer circled, it retreated. The prosecutor played the footage again, pausing at key moments, zooming, clarifying. Each frame reinforced the same truth. I had been right. The man who attacked was identified, his movements undeniable, his face unmistakable. The defense attorney barely spoke. By the time closing arguments arrived, the outcome felt inevitable. But the weight of it wasn't victory, it was reckoning. When the jury left to deliberate, I sat quietly, staring at the seal on the wall. Justice, equality, integrity, big words, heavy promises. The jury returned faster than anyone expected. They stood. The foreperson cleared his throat. "We find the defendant guilty." The word echoed through the room. My mother let out a shaky breath. Tears filled her eyes. She pressed her forehead to mine. The judge nodded. "So ordered." He raised the gavel, but before he brought it down, he paused. "One final matter," he said. Everyone looked up. "This court will submit a formal report regarding today's proceedings to the Judicial Review Board." A ripple of shock ran through the room. The judge didn't explain further. He didn't need to. The gavel struck. Court adjourned. As people stood, as conversations broke out, as cameras rushed forward, I remained seated for a moment longer. The boy who had been laughed at no longer existed in that room. In his place stood someone who had been heard. I didn't know then how far the consequences would reach. I only knew that truth had done something powerful, and it wasn't finished yet. The courtroom emptied faster than I expected. People moved like they were waking up from something heavy, talking all at once, voices layered with disbelief. Reporters clustered near the doors, cameras already rolling, microphones raised like questions waiting to be forced into the open. My mother guided me through the crowd, one hand firm on my shoulder, the other shielding my face. I heard my name spoken in whispers now, not with doubt, not with humor, but with something closer to awe. Outside, the sun felt too bright. I blinked against it, the weight of the courtroom still clinging to me. My legs felt weak, like they weren't fully mine yet. A reporter stepped forward. How does it feel to be believed? She asked. I didn't answer. Because belief hadn't been the problem, respect had. We didn't stay long. My mother wanted me home, somewhere quiet, somewhere the walls didn't echo with laughter or judgment. On the drive, she kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting over mine on the console, grounding me. You were brave, she said softly. I shook my head. I was scared. She smiled gently. Those aren't opposites. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the judge's face, first laughing, then apologizing. I heard the gasp when the video played. I felt again the moment when the room shifted, when power slipped from certainty into accountability. By morning, the story was everywhere. The footage had leaked, blurred just enough to protect me, but clear enough to show the truth. Headlines flashed across screens, comments flooded in. Some people were angry, some were shocked, some admitted they'd seen it happen before and never spoken up. The judge's name appeared in articles alongside words like review, investigation, misconduct. By the end of the week, it was official. He had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal inquiry. I stared at the screen when my mother showed me the notice. Not with satisfaction, with something quieter. The world was learning what I had already known. Adults aren't always right, authority isn't always fair, and silence doesn't mean innocence. At school, everything changed. Teachers spoke to me differently now, careful, measured, as if they were suddenly aware of how easily trust could be broken. Some classmates avoided me. Others watched me like I'd become something unfamiliar. One boy stopped me in the hallway. I didn't think you were lying, he said awkwardly. I just didn't think it mattered, I nodded. It always matters. A few days later, I was called into the principal's office. My mother sat beside me again, just like in court. The principal cleared his throat, folding his hands. We want to commend you, he said, for your courage. Courage. The word followed me everywhere now, but courage hadn't protected me from laughter. Truth had. We also want to ensure, he continued, that you feel safe and supported moving forward. I glanced at my mother. She spoke before I could. Support doesn't start after harm, she said calmly. It starts before. The principal nodded, uncomfortable. I realized then that adults didn't like being reminded of what they should have done. The man who'd attacked was sentenced weeks later. The courtroom was quieter that day. No laughter, no doubt. When the judge who replaced the first one spoke, his voice was careful, respectful. He looked at me when he thanked me for my testimony, really looked. Afterward, as we left the courthouse for the last time, my mother stopped on the steps. She turned to me. Do you know why this mattered? She asked. Because he was punished, I said. She shook her head. Because you were. That stayed with me. Months passed. The investigation into the judge concluded with findings that echoed through the legal community. Mandatory bias training, public reprimand, permanent marks on a career built on authority. Some people called it too harsh, others said it wasn't enough. I learned then that accountability rarely satisfies everyone, but it always scares those who benefit from silence. Life didn't suddenly become easy. People still judged, still assumed, still underestimated, but something inside me had shifted. I no longer shrank when I spoke. I no longer wondered if my voice mattered. Because once, in a room full of power and doubt, truth had stood up and refused to sit back down. And it had changed everything. One part remained. The part where I learned what this moment would mean for the rest of my life. That came later. I didn't realize how long moments echo until mine followed me into the future. Years passed. The world kept moving, loud and fast, but that courtroom stayed with me in quiet ways. In how I listened more carefully. In how I noticed who was believed immediately and who had to prove themselves twice. In how I learned that dignity isn't something given, it's something defended. I grew taller, my voice changed. My fear didn't disappear, but it learned how to stand its ground. People still recognized me sometimes, not often, but enough. A teacher once paused during roll call and looked up at me longer than necessary. A college interviewer mentioned that case in careful language, as if afraid to reopen something fragile. I didn't mind, because it wasn't fragile anymore. It was strong. I chose to study law, though not at first. At first, I resisted it. I told myself I wanted distance from courtrooms, from gavels, from men in robes who decided what truth looked like. but the pull came back slowly. In classrooms, when professors talked about testimony as theory, I remembered what it felt like in my chest when laughter cut through truth. When they discussed bias as a concept, I remembered a judge's smile fading as evidence played. This wasn't theory to me, this was memory. On the day I walked into my first law school lecture, my mother walked beside me to the door. She didn't come inside, she never needed to. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled the same way she had outside the courthouse years ago. Proud, steady, unafraid, inside the room buzzed with confidence. Students spoke loudly, quickly, certain of themselves. I took my seat and listened, and I knew something they didn't yet. Justice isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself, it waits for someone to refuse silence. Years later, I stood in a courtroom again, but this time I wasn't the one on the witness stand. I was at the defense table, suit pressed, notes organized, heart steady. The judge was different, the room was different, but the weight, the importance of what was said and how it was heard felt the same. When I spoke, the courtroom listened, not because of my title, not because of my age, but because truth, once learned the hard way, carries a different kind of authority. After the hearing, a young boy approached me with his mother. He couldn't have been more than 12. His hands shook when he spoke. "I heard what happened to you," he said quietly. "I was scared no one would believe me either. I knelt so we were eye level. They might doubt you," I said honestly. "They might even laugh, but that doesn't change what's true, and truth has a way of waiting until the right moment." His mother's eyes filled with tears. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. The judge's laughter hadn't just failed me. It had almost failed everyone who would come after me, but it didn't. Because evidence spoke, because silence broke, because a room full of power had been forced to listen. I don't hate that judge. I don't carry anger like a trophy. What I carry is memory and responsibility. Every time I speak, I remember the boy I was, standing alone, telling the truth anyway. And every time someone listens, truly listens, I know the moment didn't end in that courtroom. It started there. So when people ask me now what justice looks like, I tell them this. Justice is when laughter stops. Justice is when evidence is allowed to speak. Justice is when a black boy's voice isn't something to be dismissed, but something that changes the room. And once you've seen that happen, once you've felt the world shift because truth refused to be quiet, you never forget it. And neither does the world.